Normandy, June 1944. Rain-soaked and nearly forgotten to history, the bridge over the Douve River controlled everything. Take it, and German armor could cut straight through to the beaches of D-Day. Knowing this, 700 German troops slogged towards the objective, confident in their numbers. On the American side, just 40 men waited, with orders to let neither the Germans nor the bridge survive. The Americans liked these odds, as they weren't any ordinary soldiers. Military police knew them by name, but didn't dare speak it in public. Officers cursed them in private. They were the craziest, nastiest, and worst that the army had to offer. Yet, when dropped behind enemy lines, they delivered results beyond explanation. Now, the Germans were about to find out how filthy these men could actually get. Born of dirt and grit. The Filthy 13 were an infamous, hard-edged, reckless band of troublemakers who fought like hell and lived on their own terms. Their story began when one man joined a newly formed unit, the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Jake McNeese cut his teeth growing up in the Great Depression, forced to work from the age of 10 to help support his family. Hunting and fishing became second nature, building the physical toughness that made him stand out when he returned to school. In high school, McNeese earned a reputation for being a fearless competitor. He joined the football team and worked as a fireman, but it was his defiance of authority and his relentless drive to win that set him apart. McNeese was known as someone who never backed down, whether on the field or off. He protected the underdog and wasn't afraid to take on anyone, no matter how intimidating. One teacher recalled, quote, "He was not afraid of the devil and was always doing the unconventional thing." It was in this spirit of defiance and adaptability that McNeese would embrace the role of an airborne soldier. Inspired by the success of Germany's Fallschirmjäger, the first large-scale operation paratroopers, the idea of airborne troops was born out of a need to fight behind enemy lines. While infantry advanced slowly, paratroopers could be dropped directly into enemy territory. The odds were stacked against every recruit. Of every 1,000 men who wanted to wear the wings, only 10 would make it. The training demanded strength, resolve, and a disregard for fear. McNeese thrived on this kind of danger. The infantry was too passive for him. He wanted more. He sought the thrill of landing in the thick of things, where the bullets flew fast, and he could face the enemy on his own terms. For McNeese, the paratroopers' world was perfect. Reckless, brutal, and built for someone always looking for a fight. At Camp Toccoa, Georgia, McNeese joined a group of men known as the Dirty Five, a troublemaking crew that made life difficult for anyone in charge. They missed roll calls, got into bar fights, and disrespected authority. One incident involved a spat over a stick of butter with a mess officer that almost landed McNeese a dishonorable ticket home. But despite this and other unruly behavior, McNeese's skills in the field were too valuable to discard. As a commander said, quote, "McNeese isn't hurting anything. There will be a time when you'll be awful glad to have McNeese around." They saw his potential as a leader, one who led by courage, instinct, and ruthless efficiency, not discipline. He wasn't a typical soldier, and the army needed that kind of leader when they dropped into Normandy. As McNeese's reputation spread, his unit grew. What started as the Dirty Five soon became the infamous Filthy 13, a group of men who thrived on danger and defied authority. In a training camp in England, while most troops trained for the main D-Day invasion, the Filthy 13, officially the 1st Demolition Section of the 506th Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, prepared for a special mission. But in the lead-up to the invasion, McNeese pulled a stunt during a demolition drill, one reckless enough to nearly get him discharged. He rigged a tree to explode when a soldier walked by, causing panic and confusion. The entire unit was detained, but McNeese's actions were forgiven when no one ratted him out. After a short stint in the brig, they were back in action. Their behavior was tolerated because it was clear, despite their mischief, they were essential to the success of the mission. Many other soldiers knew this, and some wanted to be a part of it. Jack Hawkeye Womer, a former Provisional Ranger Battalion commando, had always chased the toughest assignments, especially in demolition. When McNeese saw his record, he knew Womer belonged with the Filthy 13. Womer agreed instantly. This was the kind of unit he'd been looking for. Reckless, fearless, exactly where he wanted to be. As Jake McNasty McNeese's crew grew, the unit's image evolved as the invasion neared. He adorned himself with face paint and a mohawk, claiming it was part of his Native American heritage. Regardless of whether this was accurate, his father nonetheless knew that, quote, he was trying to build upon the idea that if they're scared of us as crazy paratroopers, well, this just makes us look crazier. The men followed suit. The Filthy 13's reputation had spread. By the time they took off for Normandy, the world had heard of them. Their painted faces and warrior-like appearance were splashed across newspapers. They weren't just rebellious misfits. They were soldiers who thrived on decentralized command. They took risks, adapted quickly, and used their initiative. Their mission was clear: disrupt, destroy, and fight with everything they had. The drop. June 5th, 1944. The men of the Filthy 13 sat inside their C-47 Skytrain, faces streaked with war paint, waiting for the signal. Jack McNeese, their leader, had been given a crucial mission: demolish the bridges below the Douve Canal, then capture and hold the main bridge. It was a task that could cut off German reinforcements and aid the beach landings of the larger D-Day Operation Overlord. McNeese had handpicked his team, now counting 20 men, knowing that at least half wouldn't make it through. At 11 p.m., their aircraft joined nearly 1,000 others lifting off from England. The first 20 minutes passed in relative calm. Then, the sky flashed with fire. German flak batteries had found them. Explosions rocked the aircraft as black bursts filled the night. The pilots weaved to avoid the worst of it, but the defenses were thick. In the chaos, Lieutenant Charles Mellon, the official unit leader of the Filthy 13, was hit on his way out the cargo door. The men barely had time to register the loss before another blast tore through the plane. James F. Piccadilly Willie Green, one of McNeese's closest friends, was next out the door. As his parachute deployed, enemy fire ripped through it, shredding it in midair. The ruined chute whipped back into the jump door, snarling the exit. Behind him, the rest of the unit was ready to jump, but now they were trapped. Green fought to clear the tangle, hands working fast. Above him, the aircraft shuddered, engines failing. Time was running out. McNeese shoved Green aside, dove for the door, and jumped. A moment later, the C-47 exploded. The blast lit the sky as wreckage tumbled toward the fields below. Half of his men never made it out. McNeese hit the ground hard, 8 miles from the intended drop zone, alone in enemy territory. He had jumped with 20 men. He had no idea how many were on the ground, alive and ready to fight. Gunfire echoed in the distance. Moving carefully, he linked up with a few of his men. They weren't alone. 12 other paratroopers, scattered from their own units, had joined them. They had landed in the middle of enemy patrol routes, and the Germans were already on alert. Then came a familiar sound, the distinct crack of an M1 Garand. It was a signal. In the dark, surrounded by unfamiliar terrain, the American paratroopers used the unique report of their rifles to find one another. When they returned fire, the enemy's Mauser rounds confirmed what they were up against. By dawn, the toll of the disastrous drop became clearer, and they were still miles from their objective. The casualties were a blow. Roland Frenchy Barabeau, a French-Canadian who had volunteered to fight alongside America's toughest troops, was mortally wounded. Robert Cohn, the unit's medic, was hit and taken prisoner. His Jewish heritage went unnoticed, sparing him. He endured Stalag 3C until the Russians liberated it, nearly a year later. Meanwhile, McNeese believed his friend Willie Green was gone, either caught in the explosion or thrown clear, only to plummet without a chute. The army thought so too. Green's family received the dreaded notification: killed in action. McNeese walked out of Normandy with only 2 original Filthy 13 by his side, Jack Agnew and Jack Womer. The others were lost or captured. Some would not be found until the end of the war. The fate of the original unit leader, Lieutenant Mellon, had also been sealed that night. As McNeese told it, when they found him, quote, he had bandages on his arm and leg, which showed that the first bullets didn't stop him. True to the legend of the Filthy 13, Mellon survived the treacherous drop and enemy fire. He had held out until the end. The bridge. The Filthy 13 moved swiftly through the darkness, their demolition charges packed tight. They were experts in destruction, trained to take down bridges with ruthless efficiency. One by one, the smaller crossings over the Douve Canal were reduced to rubble. Each explosion cut off German reinforcements, slowing their response to the invasion unfolding on the beaches. But the main bridge, the key to either blocking or enabling German counterattacks, stood intact. McNeese and his men had one order: take it, hold it, or destroy it. There was no room for failure. They dug in on one side, waiting for the Germans to respond. The attack came soon enough. Rifle fire and machine guns hammered them from the opposite bank. For 3 relentless days, the Filthy 13 held their ground. The Germans pummeled them with bullets, mortars, and artillery shells. The Americans fought back with everything they had, returning fire with utter precision. McNeese's men knew how to shoot, when to conserve ammo, and how to make every round count. By the 3rd day, their situation seemed hopeless. Then came the final blow. Not from the Germans, but from their own side. U.S. command had assumed McNeese's unit was obliterated. No communication had come from the bridge, and High Command believed the Germans had wiped them out. To prevent the bridge from falling into enemy hands, they called in the Air Force. The roar of P-51 Mustangs filled the sky. The sleek fighters banked low, their guns blazing as they raked both sides of the canal. Then came the final strike. Bombs slammed into the bridge, turning it into rubble. McNeese and his men hit the dirt, bracing for the impact. When the dust settled, they emerged, stunned, bruised, but alive. The bridge was gone, but their fight wasn't over. 2 more days passed. The Germans, having failed to break through at the beaches, were on the run. A force of over 700 men found themselves trapped in a flooded plain near McNeese's position. The Filthy 13, now reinforced by scattered American paratroopers, had grown to 40. Outnumbered nearly 20 to 1, McNeese's men braced for the next fight. But before the shooting started, a messenger approached under a white flag. The German commander had an offer: surrender, and they would be spared. McNeese scoffed. Surrender wasn't an option. Instead, he sent his own message. If the Germans wanted to live, they could surrender to him. The German officer was furious. His response was immediate. He ordered a full-scale assault. The Filthy were ready. He had positioned his men carefully, their machine guns and mortars placed for maximum firepower. He held his fire, watching as the Germans moved forward, thinking they were facing a desperate, low-ammo force. They were wrong. The enemy crossed the halfway point, marching into the firing zone. McNeese gave the signal. The sky erupted with gunfire. Machine guns spat rounds, cutting down the first wave. Mortars rained down, destroying entire squads. The Germans faltered, stunned by the force of the American counterattack. But the Filthy 13 didn't stop. They kept firing, hammering the enemy, until the few survivors of the charge fled in terror. When the dust settled, the Filthy 13 had wiped out an entire battalion. The battle was over. The bridge was gone, and the enemy was shattered. The Filthy 13 were no longer just a ragtag group of misfits. They were masters of their craft, demolition experts, skilled tacticians, and fearless fighters. Their reputation grew as their numbers swelled with reinforcements. As the military newspaper Stars and Stripes reported, they were, quote, D-Day cutthroats bathed in blood, and plenty of it was German. Pity the Nazis who meet them. But despite the changing personnel, the core identity of the group, their defiance, their unrelenting nature, remained unchanged, ready for the next challenge. Market Garden. The Filthy 13 had already torn through Normandy. Now, they were heading into Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne operation of the war. The plan was ambitious. Airborne forces would seize key bridges ahead of advancing ground troops, punching a corridor deep into Nazi-occupied Holland. The Filthy 13's role was simple in theory, but brutal in execution. Drop behind enemy lines, take control of critical waterways, and secure the city of Eindhoven. Unlike a standard platoon, they had no official leader or sergeant overseeing them. It was just McNeese and his demolition men, operating as they always had, on their own terms. As their C-47 cut through the sky near Jersey and Guernsey, McNeese gathered his men. As he recalled his preparations, quote, "We just exchanged messages and went over the plans of exactly what we would do when we got on the ground. I kept instructing them on how to jump, how to assemble quickly, and then, just as soon as we located our objective, well, we would go work on it." The drop was rough, but the Filthy 13 regrouped fast. While the rest of the operation began unraveling into disaster, paratroopers trapped, bridges lost, the entire offensive grinding to a halt, the Filthy 13 were ordered to hold the 3 key bridges on the Eindhoven Canal. The overall mission was expected to take 6 days. Instead, the 506 PIR, alongside the 501st and 502nd Regiments, stormed through their objectives. They secured the waterways, seized the bridges, and took Eindhoven in just 36 hours. McNeese and his men dug in, knowing that if the Germans took back the crossings, they would cut off any hope of an advance. Market Garden would go down as a failure, but not for McNeese's squad. Where others were overwhelmed, they held firm. When the operation crumbled, they kept Eindhoven secured the only way they knew how: quickly, aggressively, and without hesitation. A new path. By December 1944, the Filthy 13 had a solid reputation that made them both feared and invaluable. They weren't just reckless warriors or demolition experts. They were the men commanders turned to when a mission had to be done, no matter the odds. So they assumed their new role: Pathfinders. The name alone carried a sense of fatalism. Pathfinders were the specialized soldiers first to jump, landing behind enemy lines in the middle of the night, setting up beacons to guide the rest of the paratroopers. It was a job with an expected 80% casualty rate. Command didn't waste time picking volunteers. They needed men who wouldn't flinch, who wouldn't break when they hit the ground, alone and surrounded. McNeese was exactly that kind of soldier. When they asked for him, he didn't hesitate. With utmost confidence in their leader, when the Filthy 13 saw McNeese packing up his gear, they didn't ask why. One by one, they signed up. As one of McNeese's friends described him, quote, "Jake provides the example of the kind of man others gravitate to in combat. The qualities that he looked for in others were those that would get the job done, in spite of any odds or difficulty." They knew the risks. They knew what it meant to be a Pathfinder, and they went anyway. The volunteers were sent to the 9th Troop Carrier Command Pathfinders in Chalgrove, England. It was a different world from their days in the 506th. This wasn't about holding ground or demolition. It was about precision, speed, and surviving long enough to light the way for the main force. When they arrived, McNeese reported to Captain Frank Brown. Brown took one look at him and knew he had his acting first sergeant. If anyone could prepare a Pathfinder team for the missions ahead, it was him. And that was exactly what he did. He drilled them relentlessly, pushing them to master every second of the drop and setup. There was no room for mistakes. They had to be faster than the enemy, smarter than the chaos around them. Saviors of Bastogne. December 23, 1944. Lieutenant Schrabel Williams approached McNeese with urgent news. The 101st was cut off in Bastogne. They were low on supplies, ammunition, food, and medicine, and McNeese's team was being called in for a resupply mission. This would be McNeese's 3rd combat jump, and the risks were higher than ever. Brown had selected McNeese for the mission, recognizing his tactical and technical competence since Normandy. The briefing was quick. On the tarmac, just before takeoff, the flight commander pulled out a map and pointed to the small dot on it, saying, quote, "That's Bastogne. Your division is cut off and completely surrounded. At least they were the last time we heard from them. We haven't heard from them in 2 days. Whether they're still there or not, I don't know. All indications are they still are. You're going in for a resupply mission. They're out of ammo, food, medicine. They have nothing left but a handful of men. You've got to maintain and control Bastonia to prevent the blitzkrieg from succeeding." McNeese and his men had no illusions about the danger they faced. They were jumping blind. No aerial photos of the drop zone. No intelligence on enemy positions. No communication with the men they were supposed to support. McNeese recommended splitting his team into 2 sticks of 20 men each, rather than just one, in case of an aircraft loss. If one plane went down, the other could still complete the mission. His team was the lead, tasked with signaling when it was safe for the second stick to jump. He would use orange smoke to mark the spot. The aircraft rumbled as they neared the drop zone. The green light flashed. The jump masters yelled. The men surged toward the open door. McNeese was the first out, diving into the freezing wind as the jump master shouted to go. The parachutes opened with a snap, and the men were floating toward the earth. Hitting the ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact, he unstrapped himself and immediately scanned the area. Silence. No enemy fire. They had landed on the outskirts of Bastonia. The men moved quickly, setting up a perimeter, weapons at the ready. McNeese took a moment to assess the situation. He knew the Germans were close, but there was no sign of them yet. He pulled out the first of the orange smoke grenades and tossed it into the air. The smoke billowed up, a bright signal for the second stick to follow. But the second aircraft had misjudged the drop. The stick that followed McNeese's team came down directly on top of them. The men from the second aircraft were tangled in their parachutes, landing on McNeese's team. The confusion was immediate. The men scrambled to untangle themselves, but they were in enemy territory, and they had no time to waste. McNeese quickly gave the order to regroup. One soldier had been lost in the landing, but the rest of the team was intact. Jack Agnew, a veteran of the team, had landed with McNeese. Agnew had been through a lot. Normandy, other operations, but this mission would take its toll on him. Within hours, Agnew was wounded in action, struck by a bullet as he set up a defensive position. The mission wasn't over yet. They had to get the supplies through and keep the enemy at bay. The next 5 days would test them. The Air Corps would drop over 600 plane loads of ammunition, food, gas, and medical supplies into Bastonia, thanks in large part to McNeese's ability to coordinate the drops and keep the Pathfinders in the field. Meanwhile, German counterattacks were constant, but the men of the Filthy 13 held their ground. Despite the odds, they ensured the supplies reached the defenders of Bastonia, keeping the 101st Army in the fight. McNeese's efforts in those first critical days were a key factor in the defense of the town and in the larger Battle of the Bulge. For the Filthy 13, the mission was a testament to their training, their resilience, and their ability to improvise under pressure. They dropped into the heart of the battle, delivering vital supplies to a division on the brink of collapse. The men of the 101st would not be abandoned. They had been resupplied, and for a brief moment, Bastonia held. Birthing modern warfare. James F. Piccadilly Willie Green, though reported as killed in action, actually survived. Captured by the Germans, Green was paraded through occupied towns and moved from camp to camp, emerging from captivity weighing just 82 pounds. Jake McNeese was stunned when he learned years later that Willie had survived, saying, quote, "I was so surprised to get the call that Piccadilly Willie made it through the war. I always thought he blew up with the plane. I thought Piccadilly Willie went down with the ship. He was one of the best friends I had." The Filthy 13 became the inspiration for the 1967 film The Dirty Dozen, partly based on McNeese's memoirs, with his role portrayed by Lee Marvin. McNeese was also awarded the French Legion of Honor Chevalier class in 2012. The Filthy 13's unconventional tactics revolutionized warfare, influencing modern special operations forces. Their methods were seen in the U.S. Army Rangers operations like Just Cause in 1989 and Mogadishu in 1993, SEAL Team 6's 2011 Neptune Spear and 2005's Red Wings, and Delta Force's 1980 Eagle Claw and 1991's Desert Storm. These units adopted the Filthy 13's emphasis on speed, shock, improvisation, and audacity to disrupt enemies and accomplish high-stakes missions behind enemy lines. But above all, it was their sheer fearlessness and the terror their names sparked in the enemy's heart that defined them.